Hello and welcome to week 8 in the psychology of personality, and we're looking at chapter 10, trait theories of personality, and we're getting into some more complex theories of personality that take a look at individual components that we may be high or low on, and this is often the type of personality that we refer to. You know, we'll look at characteristics of an individual and we'll say, well, they're high on this and low on this. You know, so yeah, they're really intelligent, but they're not really emotionally expressive. You know, we sort of look at those two areas of aspects of kind of describing who they are. And what we're into is the world of trait theory. Now, the world of trait theory is probably one of the older ones because it actually dates back to the time of the ancient Greeks and their concept of, or the Hippocrates concept of the ways in which people acted, and the four personality types were characterized by an emphasis of particular traits. And you can see in this little circle here we have melancholic, choleric, sanguine, and phlegmatic general personality types, and you see the individual characteristics of those individuals. Somebody is primarily melancholic. They're anxious, worried, unhappy, suspicious, serious, and thoughtful. Know any melancholic people? And so that, you know, would be going way back then. And so we're going to be looking at, you know, kind of the rising up, where the getting away from the personality theories of before, and looking at some kind of the notion of measuring sort of has come into here. So we have these, you know, philosophical, theoretical ideas of the evolving personality and inner conflicts and whatnot. That's how we do that. And then we start to see this sort of transition in psychology to, well, how do we measure that? Can't really measure id, ego, and superego. So maybe we need to move on. You know, maybe we can't measure, you know, how well somebody's doing making it up that hierarchy. Maybe we need to look at these characteristics and that we often use to describe people, and see if they kind of can be used to measure aspects of a person's personality. So we're going to be looking at kind of like 3 models of that Alport coming in. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 16PF, and kind of where we're at right now is the Big 5 personality test that looks at 5 areas of personality. So let's take a look at it. So traits, quite different from the approach that we've been doing before. They're individual characteristics of us, and Gordon Alport was the guy. He's the person that kind of brought that to our attention, looking at this. And he did something pretty similar to what I'm going to talk about. You know, sound of the nth degree was Raymond Cattell. But Alport's theory of personality looked at different aspects of a person's personality, including, as we have here in our course book, dynamic organization. This is, according to Alport, personality involves active organization of ourselves, constantly evolving and changing. So that was an aspect of personality, and there's traits that we have that dictate how we do that. Then we have psychological systems, and this is the aspects of ourselves, maybe the external presentations of ourselves, you know, that reflects our mind and body. In Alport's view, the personality determined how we acted in the world, how we did something, and it's not the same as behavior. It's sort of the engine behind behavior. So it's not just the measuring of, that's very, in a behaviorist model, personality is measured more by the observation of a person's behavior. This might be more intent and less about the behavior. So And I'm sure, we see the complexities in the other theories that we've been talking about in terms of unintentional behaviors and, little quirks about who we are. But yet our personality it's a construct that we've created, and it's almost like something that we want to be, and we strive to be, and we fail, and we'll see this notion of a difference between our behavior and our personality, slight separation between that, particularly when we look at some of the later fields like Carl Rogers and his the integrated self theory, where he talks about three selves that we have. There's the real self, who we really are. There's the ideal self that we have, and then there's the social, or the presentation to the public about what our personality is. And that the degree to which those three are integrated is the degree to which we have an integrated personality. If we're true to ourselves, true to our ideals, and true to what we do out there, he thought that was a good thing. And his process of therapy was actually to unite those. They're never totally the same, but to help a person make those closer. Now, that could mean changing the ideal. I'm not going to be like that, and accepting who you are. It can mean having some courage about being your true self out to the public. Maybe there's some stuff you need to change to bring you closer to your ideal. You're not living up to your own expectations. That was the process of therapy for Carl Rogers. And it was a personality changing process. Okay, so here we have in his theory, he had dispositions, and sort of like, equates, I deal a lot with identity, and that's kind of a very favorite topic of mine. And the characteristics of identity, there's central and there's peripheral, sort of aspects of who we are. And so we get this sort of from Alport as well, probably basically describing the same thing. Cardinal dispositions, this is, you're like this no matter what. These are, you can't stop doing these things. That's the way you are. Central dispositions, that's what good friends will know what those are. It's kind of like the person you really are. And secondary traits, they might be less stable. They might be traits that you pull out when you need to be. So we're going to see, when we look at the big five, we're going to look at a big one in there. One of the biggest ones, most popular ones, is extroversion and introversion. And we'll recognize that maybe someone's cardinal central trait is that they're an introvert, but they can be an extrovert when it's called upon. So that would be so introversion might be their cardinal trait, and extroversion might be their secondary disposition, to use the term here. So we then move into the world of Raymond Cattell. There's some other stuff there, read up on Alport, but I want to talk about Cattell because I had the opportunity when I was going to school, getting my degree in psychology at St. Thomas University, that one of my instructors was John Gillis, and he was the official biographer of Raymond B. Cattell. And Raymond B. Cattell had done amazing things. He's a prolific writer. He's invented factor analysis, statistics, very complex way of kind of expanding on what Alport did in terms of all of his describers for personality. And he was also a very controversial character. He was at one time, Raymond Cattell was the president of the APA, and a personality theorist, developed a test still known today as the 16 Personality Factors Inventory. But he had a falling out with the American Psychological Association when he began to dabble in the concept of eugenics. Now, eugenics is a philosophy that grew out of some of the early writings related to evolution, that said maybe we should selectively breed characteristics of humanity out and breed characteristics of humanity in. And well, let's just say that eugenics was one of Hitler's favorite words to throw around. So it's really not a concept that's going to get you very far. Sadly, Catel's view on things was he was I don't believe he was promoting it, but he was asking those questions like, hey, well, what about this? And we also talk about, I know in some of my other classes I've talked about, how we select partners to have kids, and we have our traits that we're looking for, and are we not playing, the preferred traits that we would like our next generation to have? We're doing it, of course, non-scientifically, but we meet someone and they have a particular personality trait that drives us up the wall. Chances are, hopefully, we're not going to have kids with them because we don't want our kids to have that trait. And so he was asking some of these questions and he ran into a lot of trouble with them. So he's quite a colorful character in the history of psychology. And I got to know him through his official biographer, who was John Gillis. And I also ended up in my undergraduate work doing a study on mood change as a result of listening to music samples. And I used one of his tools, which is no longer being published. I tried to find it in order to replicate that study, even in the modern day, and it's not available. And that was Catel's 8 states questionnaire, which had an A part and a B part. That's what was really cool. So I could measure someone's emotional state now, expose them to music, and then measure their emotional state after with different but correlated questions. Very cool tool. Out of publication right now, unavailable. But what Cattell was also very famous for was crunching huge sample size numbers. And so essentially to create the 16 PF, the 16 personality traits that are identified within his test, he took a gazillion words that describe people, and he had individuals, he had them testing them. He was testing them, rating themselves on these words. And he did this literally thousands upon thousands of times. And then what he used, his math that we now know as factor analysis, and he constructed mathematical models to group together, where there, if people rated this one high, what was the likelihood that they rated this one high? And we're talking about thousands of data pieces here. And so he grouped those together into what he called factors. And every time the rotational aspect out of it is a mathematical application to kind of shake things up and move things into smaller and smaller categories. That he then took these thousands of words and basically ran the correlations and said there was like 16, and the number 16 came out of the data. He didn't come up with 16 and looked for them. He just crunched them, these are grouped together, these are grouped together, these are grouped together, until he got to 16 and said, okay, I think those are pretty distinct. They're not necessarily related to one. When one goes up, the other one doesn't necessarily go up. There became these distinct characteristics. And that approach to science was relatively new. He actually, and I'm a little akin to this, he was sort of against the notion of, he played the game to publish, but he was sort of against the notion of having hypotheses when you're going into the study. He felt that created a bias. I do too. And so he would basically collect data from these massive studies they did on a global scale, and would crunch the numbers and see what he found out. And then he would publish those. So I thought that was a very interesting, and I aligned with that. I thought that was a pretty good, of course, I've written hypotheses and done studies like that, but I really respected that he had that difference. And he produced for us what we now still use as the 16 personality factors questionnaire. It's a licensed test. I can't give it to you because you need to be licensed to do it. And it looks at these 16 traits: reserved versus outgoing, concrete thinking versus abstract thinking, affected by feelings, emotionally stable, submissive, dominant. You know, you see each one of these kind of characteristics, and where are you on the continuum in there? And so it's a extremely cool, extremely powerful tool. And there have been lots and lots of trait theory tests like this. And what it has all kind of come down to is years ago there was a meta-analysis study. Let me tell you what that is. A meta-analysis looks at trends that exist across a number of studies. They don't look at subjects. The subjects of the study are the other studies. So they look at all kinds of different personality tests out there, personality trait tests and whatnot, and they found that there were 5 that were almost universal. They always came up, these 5, and they called them the big 5. Now to remember them, think of the word ocean, the depths of the personality, but captured by the word ocean. And what we have is openness to experience, the ability to, well, kind of self-explanatory there. Conscientiousness, attention to detail, other people's feelings and emotions. Extroversion, where you get your energy. Keeping in mind that people have the ability to be closed to experience. I have the ability to be non-conscientious, even though I kind of score off the charts on openness to experience. Conscientiousness, right around the middle. Extroversion, where do you get your energy? I really like to say that when I'm talking about extroversion and introversion, I really like to bring up, are you the last one to leave the party and you're reluctant to go? Or do you get there in 5 minutes, you're like, I could just about go anytime now? That's the extremes of extroversion and introversion. Agreeableness, the kind of laid backness of the person. And neuroticism, this is again that attention to detail and planning and the high. Now neuroticism has a bad rap because that was Freud's, he had a couple diagnoses, and neuroticism was one of them. People became dysfunctionally neurotic. But an attention detail person is a good individual to have on the team, got to tell you. But the highly neurotic individual is the individual, maybe among you, this would be a great conversation to have. Highly neurotic individuals individuals that have a file folder at home for all of their bills, and they have separate folders for each class that they're taking care. And just my wife is like this. She has, she organizes. You see her craft room. They take pictures of it and put it in Crafting Magazine. There's little cabinets for everything and everything just so. It goes to chaos, but then it all has a place to go in the end, and that's very important. The worst thing I can do is rearrange the kitchen, which I've done on occasion, and it completely drives her up the wall. I try not to do that very often. However, I have put in there an app if you happen to have an iOS device, an Apple device, but also a website, so you can take the big 5 personality test. And that's our first discussion. Let's talk about it. Let's take the test and let's report out. Does it make sense? Is this just capturing something about myself? If somebody asked me, tell me about your personality, could I hand them the results and say, this is probably a pretty good picture. It's not the whole thing, but got some pretty useful stuff here. And then I have an assignment. And this assignment is a little quirky. I had to update the materials in the class because the link wasn't there. But it kind of goes into Gordon Allport's, without going into the extreme that Cattell did, but looking at Gordon Allport's list of terms used to describe people. And I want you to go through those lists. It's not an exhaustive, and you're going to put into, you're going to pick words that you feel match your cardinal, central, and secondary disposition. So you're going to kind of an application of Allport's theory using some of those words. You might have to look up some of them. Just have fun with this. So use the categories to organize your traits, and for each category provide a brief explanation as to what makes that set Let's say you had a bunch of words that are your cardinal traits, and say, tell me why those are your cardinal traits. Why do you feel those are your cardinal traits? Again, we're looking at 2 areas of insight, one of which is going to be private. You're just going to share it with me. That's the assignment. And then the 16 PF results that you're going to share in the discussion. So a whole lot of self-discovery in front of you. So I will see you in the discussion boards, and I'm looking for it. And I'm going to do it too. I will share my results as well. So in the 16 PF part. So I will see you in there.